Really excited about this upcoming presentation from a couple of folks who work with the Nuclear Innovation Institute. We have Jessica Linthorne, who is the leader of the Clean Energy Frontier program. And joining Jessica will be Chad Richards, and he leads up the new nuclear and net zero partnerships. And they are going to tell you about all the ways that they are supporting innovation around clean energy and climate solutions in the local community. And with that, Jessica, I'm going to turn it over to you. Welcome.
Thank you so much, Philly. It's really a pleasure to be here. So I'm coming to you live from the Catapults Grey Bruce crash pad.
I see.
And you know, when weather's a factor and you've got 3 little children at home, you send a quick text to a contact and say, hey, what do you think? Can I join the crash pad? So grateful to be here, and really looking forward to sharing some information today in regards to the Nuclear Innovation Institute. My colleague Chad Richards will be jumping on the call in a few moments, so we will welcome him when we see his face jump on. So yeah, as Philly mentioned, I'm the director of the Clean Energy Frontier program, and we're going to talk a little bit about different programs within the Nuclear Innovation Institute, but I'll start with an overview of the organization. And our purpose really is to connect and convene. And so we are a platform for demand-driven innovation in the nuclear sector, driving forward the adoption of new technology and practices that improve performance. So looking towards finding those efficiencies in the nuclear sector. We are an independent, not-for-profit organization and stood up in 2020. And of course, I don't need to remind anyone what happened in March of 2020. Our idea of having that community space is now finally coming to fruition as we're able to see the other side, hopefully move out of the pandemic and welcome people into our space. But we are active in the community of Port Elgin, very busy. It's a wonderful time to walk through the doors of the NII, lots of excitement and energy. We are a connector and a convener, as I mentioned, between our members, our founding members, and others in the community, providing that platform for solutions. And again, we do have a strong focus on awareness and improve public education. So it was great to see Linda's presentation. We've had some great conversations with her and working really closely with other communities as we collectively work towards some climate change action. So as mentioned, we are capitalized by our founding members. So on this slide, you'll see that Bruce County and Bruce Power have come together, BWXT, Fox Nuclear, Cameco, SNC-Lavalin, and Kinetrix. So working together to find efficiencies in the nuclear sector by supporting the Nuclear Innovation Institute. So these are our founding members. Just like other organizations, we certainly do measure our success, and we measure that success through the direct and indirect value that we do deliver back to our founding members by changing, creating those innovative process and new efficiencies in the sector. We are moving the needle towards global clean energy future, and again, measuring that with the social and economic benefits that we do bring to the region as the clean energy sector. So when I share this elevator speech of who the Nuclear Innovation Institute is, I joke with my colleagues, I have to use my hands because there are 2 main streams of business. So when I talked about the founding members, they sit with that industry innovation project side, and then the public interest work is where my program sits, along with a number of my colleagues. So the industry side is led by my colleague, Dr. Eric Johnston. He's our Chief Innovation Officer. And so Eric and his team, they follow these 3 areas of focus: transforming and optimizing the energy generation, as mentioned, working with those nuclear suppliers, of course, those founding members. They're also looking at environmental stress. And so you can see here, there's a few examples, things, low dose radiation effects, next generation medical isotopes. And again, their 3rd area of focus is to explore those net zero pathways. So looking at new opportunities, the adoption of hydrogen, small modular reactors, fusion, carbon offsets. And my colleague Chad, when he jumps on, he'll be speaking in more depth on the carbon offsets and the Carbon Offset Coalition that Linda had mentioned in her presentation as well. So Eric and his team work with a number of friends. And so here's just a few friends, and we do have other friends of the Nuclear Innovation Institute to add to this list, including Catapults Great Bruce, who we have recently joined a partnership. We have an MOU, and our friends, our organizations have committed to working collaboratively, which is very exciting. And we did hear from Jennifer Christie this morning in her presentation about that opportunity to work together with the Catapults Great Bruce organization, the Catapult Tech Network, working with the nuclear sector. So we're really excited about collaborating and working with other organizations. And so here's some logos, some examples of other institutes that we do work with on a regular basis as part of that industry innovation side of our organization. So moving to the other, and I have to use my other hand, the other side of the organization when we talk about the public interest work that we have. And so, just to open this conversation on the public interest work, from everything from COVID vaccine clinics, we opened our doors, wanted to help the community when we were able to roll out vaccines, STEM education programs, I'll share a little bit more on, which I love the picture of the boy on the left with his spaghetti and marshmallow structure. And then, of course, with original research. And so we do produce a number of original reports speaking to the science and the technology behind some clean energy initiatives, new technology, and how we can drive change for a cleaner future. So the NII Explorer program is led by my colleague, Philip Craig. And if you have been exposed to this program, or maybe your kids have done a virtual coding class, you may recognize Philip, and he's very charismatic, brings his team forward to different summer camps, even to markets, popping up tents, doing science experiments. And right now they're focusing with the Coding in the Classroom program. And they were able to pivot, very rapidly with the pandemic, being able to offer right into the classroom virtual experiences around STEM education. So working closely with both school boards in Bruce Grey, and really looking forward to seeing this program as it continues to evolve. Last week, we hosted at the Nuclear Innovation Institute the World Climate Simulation for Teens, and based on a UN model, and it was really well received, really exciting. We had a number of teams coming in, working on climate change, talking about hope and the need to have action now. And so continuing to engage our children and our youth in STEM is critical. The environment at NII, so Eric works with this as well with lots of our friends and research partners. And a good example of a recent project is having a look at Fairy Lake in Southampton. So in Southampton, there's a small inland lake called Fairy Lake. It's beautiful. It's behind the museum. There's a trail around, but the lake isn't doing well. So working with a team of researchers to understand the health of the lake, how we can help, what have we done in the past that may be contributing to this decline in the lake's health. So projects like that fit within this environment at NII. And again, it's research for a greener, healthier world. The Municipal Innovation Council, this is a really exciting one. This group has come together, and these are municipalities, 7 lower tier, Bruce County as the upper tier, working together to find efficiencies. So the opportunity for municipalities to pool resources and talk about their common challenges and seek out those solutions. So this group is led by my colleague, Becky Smith, and she's the director for the Center of Municipal Innovation. Just this morning, I did see a news release has come out, and it really speaks to some of the efficiencies, the cost savings, the opportunity to leverage funding, and some of the projects that are moving forward. It's really exciting to see that this group has pulled together, recognizing that there's work to do to move forward towards, again, that cleaner future. The Clean Energy Frontier program. So this is my program. So I'm really excited to share all about this program. And so the Clean Energy Frontier program is funded by Bruce County and Bruce Power. And I have a couple of slides to follow that speak a little bit more on the background. But I will say it's a real privilege for me to work with Bruce County, Grey County, and Huron County, being able to work in an economic development role where I'm working across 3 counties with one sector in mind, and that one sector being clean energy. It's really exciting time. We're producing original information like the plugging in report. And so just to speak quickly to that, that's a report that we worked in partnership with Plug and Drive to understand and to survey some EV drivers and owners to gauge their wants and needs in regards to charging infrastructure. So recognizing that tourism is an economic driver, and we know that we're in this transition toward electric vehicles. So coming forward saying this is a clean energy opportunity, let's get ready for it. Let's protect our tourism sector. Let's get the infrastructure we need. Really exciting work, and it's a privilege to be on this team. So a little bit of background on the Clean Energy Frontier program. In 2016, this program was referred to as the Nuclear Economic Development and Innovation Initiative. And so as mentioned, it was funded by Bruce County and Bruce Power, but this is really the time that Bruce Power made that deliberate effort to grow the supply chain here in the Clean Energy Frontier region. And we call the Clean Energy Frontier region Bruce Grey, Huron counties. So these three counties have come together to do this really good work. So you'll see, fast forward to today, we have rebranded as the Clean Energy Frontier program, recognizing the success that we have had in the last number of years to attract and retain, and now we're seeing expand. So in 2016, you can see here on this map, we've got our 13 suppliers in one county. Fast forward, we have over 60 major suppliers now across 3 counties and reaching up into a Saugeen Ojibwe Nation community. So we've recently wrapped up an economic impact report, and this economic impact report was having a look at clean energy in these 3 counties, specifically having a look at Bruce Power and their direct, indirect, and induced effects. And so when we think about direct, that could be Bruce Power's employees, the work that's being done, spent by Bruce Power. Our indirect are these suppliers that are supporting their employees, the expenses that they may have. And so all of that to say, we found some really interesting data. And so the next few slides, I'm going to share some of that with you. So what we found was that our provincial GDP contribution, you'll see here, it's over $4 billion. Having a closer look at some comparables, here's what we found. Over $4 billion, and that again, that's Bruce Power, but that's their direct, indirect, and induced effects. And then you can see in these comparables where we sit in regards to other major industries in the province of Ontario. This one, I like to throw this slide in just to say, we're just about contributing to the GDP as much as the motion picture and video production sector in the province of Ontario. Again, direct, indirect, and induced effects for both of those as we're talking about clean energy through Bruce Power and their indirect and induced, but then also the indirect and induced when we think about the video production sector. This is a really great slide. My background is municipal government, so when I speak to elected officials, I love to emphasize this. Over $233 million was collected for the municipal government share of the taxation collected. And most of that, the vast majority of that, over 233 million, is staying right here in the Clean Energy Frontier region of Bruce Grey, Huron. Sharing this slide with you around household spending. And so I won't dive into it too much, but I did include it purposefully because I think it's really fascinating to have a look at the household spending that occurs as a result of the clean energy sector. Again, direct, indirect. And so we see in 2020, we saw $1.43 billion spent right here in Bruce Grey, Huron, as a result of the clean energy sector. And so what this chart does is it breaks down. And so just to point a few things, I see this 56 million. We still managed, in a year of a pandemic, we still managed to spend $56 million on our local restaurants. And all of this to say, what a great time to be an entrepreneur in Bruce Grey and Huron counties. And all of this work is moving forward from our community hub in Port Elgin. And so here's a few images of the Nuclear Innovation Institute. If you haven't been in our space, touch base, You can contact me, you can contact anybody on the team. We'd love to have you through. We're really proud of what we've built, and we're really proud of the programs that we offer. You can see Philip in the lower left, and I love that picture. He's such a charismatic and active champion for STEM education. And so just, sharing with you some colorful photos and inviting you to join us in our facility. If there's an opportunity for a facilitated discussion, if you're looking for a whiteboard space, if you'd like to just pop in and learn more, don't hesitate to reach out. So I'm going to try to advance with some of Chad's slides here around his net zero opportunities. So Chad Richards, who should be on the call by now, and I apologize that he's not quite yet. But Chad is our director for the Bruce Power Center for New Nuclear and Net Zero Partnerships. And so Chad, certainly with his background and the conversations, connections that he's had, he knows there's agriculture's net zero opportunity, and he's well connected in advancing some of this really good work. So when we talk about net zero, and we do have a really great video on our website, and it's really the emphasis or the understanding of it is that it's accessible and inclusive conversation. And the video is called Take a Moment to Understand Net Zero. And what it is it's this conversation around what do we mean when we say net zero. We recognize that carbon will continue to be emitted. So how can we lower those emissions? We think about electric vehicles as a good example, but we understand that there will be carbon emitted. And when we talk about net zero, now, how do we offset that carbon? And so, this is how we talk about net zero. This is how we explain net zero. But I would welcome you to take a look at the Nuclear Innovation Institute website and have a look at some of those videos, because we do have really good content there as well. So yeah, as described, we have our carbon in, our carbon out, our net zero. And absolutely, we know that businesses are facing pressure to not only act, but to lead. And when we think about entering the age of net zero products, we're seeing that. We see businesses, we're seeing entrepreneurs advancing with the net zero approach and what that means to have a net zero facility, and understanding that we are all working toward net zero emissions. And businesses are setting targets. So Bruce Power has set, their operations have set publicly that they will achieve net zero by 2027, which is an ambitious goal, absolutely. However, recognizing that Bruce Power with clean energy, their business is not emitting emissions as much as some of the tactics that they're able to change on the ground. So facility operations and vehicles are their carbon in, carbon out, elimination, reduction, offsets. And so this is how Bruce Power will work towards reaching net zero. So what does this mean for agriculture? Examples of the carbon offset protocol that have been applied. And so you can see here, we've got a list of opportunity and how does offsetting work? Well, we understand that offset units cancel out emissions. And so businesses and organizations can purchase those offset units, recognizing that we will emit, as mentioned, we will continue to emit, but what can we do to offset that? And certainly offsets have faced challenges. And these really truly are Chad's slides, and I'm doing the best I can, admittedly, but I can tell you, just learning from Chad and the conversations we've been a part of, I understand that there's so much complication in regards to offset markets and voluntary carbon markets. And there's lots of confusion, lots of jargon out there. And so having the ability to understand and to create localized opportunities, that's a project, that's a program that the Nuclear Innovation Institute is really proud of. So we are bringing energy and agriculture together. And so as mentioned in Linda's presentation, the Carbon Offset Coalition, this program launched in April, and the first round of project intakes ran until December. And so now Chad and his team, they're looking at that first round of projects, and they will be announced soon. I see he's bold and underlined that because I think he wanted to be able to announce something today, but we're just not quite there yet. but there is that significant focus on local agriculture. So it's really exciting to know that this is coming soon. It's too bad we couldn't spill it all today, but we'll be able to spill it in not too long. And there's potential for new intake in summer of 2022. So with that, again, this is Chad's program in his center, so New Nuclear and Net Zero Partnership. So he is continuing to have regional dialogue with communities, community members, community groups. We recently had a meeting with the Sustainability Project to understand how we can work together, working closely again, as mentioned with Catapults Grey Bruce, understanding again how we can collaborate. And so working towards that decarbonization effort through the Carbon Offset Coalition, but then through other resources and avenues we're able to provide. So looking at original research and working together with the nuclear sector, clean energy sector, right into, as we advance into a hydrogen economy, considering renewables, fusion energy, and building on the work from the Center of Next Generation Nuclear. So we have had lots of conversation. There is continuing lots of conversation on hydrogen and working toward a hydrogen economy. And so we are pleased to be able to act as the task force lead in the Nuclear Hydrogen Working Group with the strategy. And so Chad is leading that dialogue. If you have specific inquiries or opportunities, questions, or just want to chat hydrogen, Chad's really the best point of contact with the Nuclear Innovation Institute. As that task force lead, he's learning lots and has a good understanding of what this hydrogen economy may look like in the clean energy frontier region of Bruce Grey Huron, but certainly as the province and as the country. So with that, I'm happy to take any questions. I apologize that my colleague is not on the line, but I can answer what I'm able to, and I'm certainly able to connect and follow up.
Jess, I invite you to, if you want to go off script and speak about any of the other exciting initiatives that some of your other colleagues at the NII are working on. I know that we have met with you, and I know that there are other partnerships with other organizations in other cities doing research. And while we wait for questions or possibly for Chad to join us, maybe you can talk about some of those other projects.
Yeah, sure. No, that sounds great. It's it's really exciting, the work that we're doing at the Nuclear Innovation Institute. And so my program, again, that economic development opportunity and being able to work with community groups, I've been able and really fortunate to share some of this economic impact data across the 3 counties with delegations to county councils, but then also sharing that information with chambers of commerce, business associations. And really just, it's been a great story. It's a great opportunity to celebrate who we are here and to drive home that message that we are the clean energy frontier region. We're committed to climate change action, and we are committed to lowering emissions. So Chad, thanks so much. I see Chad is here on the line now. Chad, we're just having a look and opening the floor for some questions and general conversation. I did move through our slide deck. But maybe, Philly, with Chad on the line now, I'll share my screen again, back a slide or two. Chad, could you speak maybe a bit more in regards to the Carbon Offset Coalition?
Yeah, absolutely. So Jess, did you run through, and my apologies everyone for my tardiness. I got tied up at a board meeting taking some tough questions. So maybe we'll run back to some of maybe back to the first slide that I've started on, Jess, and I can run through kind of the section that we're doing here at the Center for New Nuclear and Net Zero Partnerships. Maybe go back a couple more. All right, so really, I think that Jess has likely done a very good job of explaining what we do at the NII and kind of who we are as an entity. And really, we're all about connecting and convening our organization and our region that we're very proud to operate in with this whole notion of net zero, a clean energy future. How do we do that? And really, we see a fundamental role for agriculture and energy, 2 of our central economic drivers, to play a key part in a net zero future. And part of that comes from the fact that Net zero by 2050 has been the established target by organizations like the United Nations, International Panel on Climate Change, recognizing net zero 2050 as the target. That is what we have to do to limit global warming and mitigate the worst effects of a changing climate. And part of that is now pressure being put on businesses. And this is a really fundamental part of where agriculture can come into the conversation, is the pressure that's being put on businesses to not only act on that, but to lead and really be seen as private sector leaders of a net zero future, and really not only achieving net zero emissions within a country or a nation context, but how do we do that at our own businesses? How can we ensure that the products you're producing, the businesses that you're operating are truly net zero and making positive contributions to those nationwide goals of net zero emissions? So I put some articles up on the slide there from the chair of the COP26 conference saying businesses must lead this drive. And really, we're already seeing that in some of the net zero products, literally products being marketed now as net zero. And I noticed this cider a few months ago from Duntroon, so a local cidery that is really marketing a product as net zero. They've implemented net zero practices in the creation of their product and are marketing it as such. And really, I think that will be a key part of a net zero future for businesses as we go down the road. And really, that all looks like the net zero equation that we've identified previously. So if you just hit the next button there, Jess. So, maybe go back one. So this is the net zero carbon equation for businesses. And I thought it was important to do this because really agriculture comes into the conversation in one specific part of that. So when you think of net zero for a business, you go back to that carbon in, carbon out equals net zero. And so carbon in for businesses are things like facilities operations, like the buildings that you have on your site or the vehicles that you drive on your site. And what's the carbon profile of those, or any sort of practices that you undertake that produce emissions. And then carbon out on a path to net zero are the eliminations of those practices. So whether it's switching to electric vehicles or hydrogen powered practices that you can do on site, so you eliminate the use of carbon within those practices, or you reduce them to a certain point. And for those pieces that you cannot eliminate or reduce, maybe the technology is not even viable at this point or it's not yet created, you look to offsets. And really that is where agriculture can play a fundamental role as it relates to other businesses. And Bruce Power has announced a very ambitious target of being a net zero site by the year 2027. Obviously, the product they produce is already a carbon-free source and is actually enabling other sources. So that's fine. The product being produced doesn't actually impact emissions profiles, but the site operations are what we're talking about when we say net zero by 2027 for Bruce Power. So next slide, please, Jess. And so I think this is the perfect opportunity to highlight the offsetting piece. Again, eliminations and reductions of emissions on site by switching to electric vehicles, reducing emissions profile of buildings, et cetera. But for those hardest to abate emissions, that last mile, as it's often referred to, there's a practice called offsetting. And I know that a number of you will be familiar with the concept of offsetting. But again, just a quick refresher on how that works. So emissions are produced somewhere else, and offsets are ways that the producers of those emissions fund work or purchase work that has been done elsewhere to drive down emissions, and use those offsets to really create a truly net zero or carbon neutral company operations. And I listed in preparation for this presentation, I went to the government of Alberta has a really interesting history with carbon offsets, and there are tools called protocols, which are essentially procedures that you use to measure, verify, and conduct carbon offsetting work. And so the interesting thing about agriculture is Canadian agriculture already has a very proud history, or a really robust history of practices already being done that can draw down carbon and really suck carbon out of the air and sequester it in soil, or to be used to really limit the emissions profile of agriculture itself. So things like conservation cropping, reduced tillage, reducing emissions from fed cattle has also been used in Alberta as a way to produce a carbon offset. Different practices within the beef industry to draw down the emissions from cattle. Microgeneration and distributed renewable energy generation, again, just looking at ways to limit the emissions profile of potentially the farm itself and use those as offsets. And then looking at biogas, you look at anaerobic decomposition of materials. Those are all really exciting projects that are ongoing. There are examples, a lot of examples of different biogas initiatives within the greenhouse sector, which is really exciting. And a lot of those initiatives are being used right now to, one, they establish the clean practice within their facilities themselves, which is just a net benefit for them in and of itself, but then selling the offsets from that practice and really seeing some monetary benefit back after having established those biogas initiatives. So really all that to say, agriculture runs the circuit for the possibilities of what businesses might be looking to in establishing these robust offsets. And I just use the term robust offsets because I think it's important to highlight that offsets have not been without their challenges. There have been there has been abuse of the offsetting system. I put some articles on the screen here where really not everybody loves the notion of offsetting carbon. That if we have weak carbon offsets and weak carbon markets that don't have the really robust standards that we need, then it really does actually limit our ability to reach net zero by 2050. And you look at something as seemingly harmless as the Nature Conservancy, and the article that's on the screen there from last April. The Nature Conservancy actually had to run an audit of their own carbon offsetting practices because they found that they were double selling the same credit. And it leads to a lot of questions about the robustness of these markets and how these markets can develop to really ensure that they're providing a net benefit to the net zero ambitions. And that's really where our ambition for the Carbon Offset Coalition comes into things. So we can move to the next slide, Jess. So as I mentioned, really Bruce Power, again, within that net zero 2027 ambition and looking at the carbon offset market was really looking at, we can spend money and purchase offsets. That's a given. Anybody can do that right now. You can go to pick a market and purchase an offset, and you can use that within your profile. But Bruce Power took a different approach and said, if we are going to invest in carbon reduction activities, we want to ensure that our regional communities can play a part in that, and we can drive homegrown decarbonization rather than just purchase offsets from a rainforest in Brazil. Let's do this at home. Let's keep the money here at home, and let's drive benefit and local knowledge and expertise for our local agricultural sector. So that was really the motivation behind the Carbon Offset Coalition. It was launched in April of 2021, so coming up on a year now that it's been launched and out there. And it's been a learning experience for everybody involved. Keeping in mind, this is a new conversation for a lot of people. Not everybody was familiar with carbon offsets even 6-8 months ago. So this has really been a learning experience as we go along. We kept the first intake of the program open until December 31st and really received a lot of very interesting, very strong proposals from the community on what might be possible to develop a carbon offset ecosystem here in the Bruce Cray Huron region that we affectionately call the clean energy frontier, and certainly is part of that. This whole notion of carbon offsetting activities is part of that clean energy frontier context, and how do we drive that benefit here? But also for Bruce Power, looking at having these robust offsets that we know we can trust. There's no double selling because we were intimately involved in building these opportunities, and we can truly count those as part of our net zero 2027 ambitions. The first round of projects will be announced very soon. I was really hoping that we were going to be in a position to let you know exactly what we were doing. It's very close, but I will leave you with this. There's a significant focus on local agriculture in our first round of projects, and one that we will be looking to engage with the agricultural sector quite heavily on through a partnership that we've developed in this space. So I think that there's, again, just hyper local focus and very agricultural focused, and really looking at you don't have to be, like an industrial sized operation to contribute to what we plan on doing here in the region. We're looking at, smaller plots of land that we can do carbon sequestration work on. Perhaps it's grassland or stream remediation work. That's all going to be part of this ecosystem that we're building, and it's going to be really exciting. And again, apologies that we can't come out today and say exactly what we're going to be doing in this space, but it will be a really exciting opportunity. And I'm not even going to say months; it's weeks or even days that this will be kind of out the door, and we'll be looking to engage heavily with the agricultural sector. So before I move on, just wanted to leave it with, feel free to reach out to me anytime. I'm happy to provide context on what we're doing here. And really my phone line and email address is always open. And the final thing to say about the Carbon Offset Coalition is we're looking at opening up for a new intake of projects potentially in summer 2022. We're going to take the lessons learned from this round of intakes and maybe apply some new lenses so that everybody knows exactly what we're asking for here, and approaching the community again for a new round of ideas. But this first phase will really involve robust engagement with our agricultural sector on driving local projects here for that first phase. And we'll move to the next slide. And I guess I just, before we move on, that's kind of Carbon Offset Coalition, but before we move on, I wanted to provide a bit of context on, what it is that I do on a day-to-day basis. And there are certainly themes in here that connect with the agricultural sector that I wanted to just leave with you so that you know exactly what we're doing here at the NII and the types of conversations that we're having. So the Center for New Nuclear and Net Zero Partnerships does a number of things. The first that we've already talked about extensively is the Carbon Offset Coalition. We also look to raise awareness on the role of nuclear in a net zero future. So some of these conversations do impact the agricultural sector. We're looking at really a very significant increase in the amount of electricity that we're going to be consuming as we move to electrification, and different practices on farm that can be electrified are potentially part of that conversation as well. So really looking at nuclear playing that foundational role in providing electricity to power our lives and power the grids of the future. That's a significant portion of what we do. And on that front, we recently released a report on the role of energy storage and how it interacts with nuclear as well. So it's all kind of part of this ecosystem of clean energy and reaching net zero ambitions or net zero targets. And we also look at forging ties between nuclear and other clean energy sectors. So looking at how does nuclear enable a hydrogen economy? How can nuclear and fusion learn from one another? Fusion is a really exciting opportunity. The running joke is that fusion is 20 years away, and it always has been 20 years away. But really, there's really some significant movement on the fusion sector right now. And how can fusion learn from some of the lessons from nuclear? We're looking to build those alliances as well. And a lot of that builds on the work of the former Center for Next Generation Nuclear. And I think as I've been communicating with folks in the agricultural space, topics like SMRs and microreactors and distributed energy resources are all things that I know that folks like you are having on a day-to-day basis. Next slide, please, Jess. And I would just leave this with you. I know that in communicating with some of the local federations of agriculture, a lot of our local municipalities, there is a significant interest, it seems, at least in these past couple months, when it comes to hydrogen. And hydrogen really is an interesting opportunity. It's a clean fuel, which is different than, obviously electricity. So fuels of the future we're looking at zero emissions fuels. And when we look at those opportunities, hydrogen certainly has been front and center as a possibility. And there are use cases for hydrogen within the agricultural sector. So whether it's using hydrogen for urea or ammonia, that's certainly a topic of discussion. And I just wanted to leave the group with the knowledge that through the center, from Port Elgin, we are engaged with Natural Resources Canada on developing production opportunities for hydrogen under the Hydrogen Strategy of Canada. So we're doing really some kind of intimate work with the government of Canada to look at different regional opportunities as they exist for developing a hydrogen economy. So if there's anybody on the call that wanted to learn more about that or connect about hydrogen and what hydrogen can mean for agriculture, absolutely happy to discuss that and really give you an overview of the work that we're doing in that space. And with that, I will wrap up. And once again, apologies for my tardiness. It was a stressful 15 minutes.
Thanks, Chad, for covering some of that. I did the best I could, but you did a much better job. So I appreciate that.
It's great.
Thanks to both of you. That was actually really expansive and informative, and I really appreciate it. And we do have a few questions, and I am going to invite more. We are going to break for lunch at noon, so we do have some time for questions. Chad, you've got a big announcement coming, as you say, in days, weeks, possibly months, but we of course are hoping sooner. How can people find out about that announcement if not through media? Can you tell us about newsletters or other ways that people can connect with you?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm not sure if the chat function delivers email addresses to all attendees, but if you have a pen and paper handy, you can email me directly. My email address and phone lines are always open. So my email address is chad.richards, RICHARDS, @nii.ca. And just literally get in touch with me. We can set you up on some of the behind the scenes work that's already ongoing. And then obviously once that announcement is made public, we'll be looking to do some pretty heavy engagement with the sector. So if we can already be building a list of interested stakeholders, that's more than helpful. So I'd encourage folks to get in touch with me directly, and we can go from there. I think that's outstanding, and it really is unfortunate that we can't announce today what exactly we're doing. There's lots of exciting work, and it's hopefully not the first, or it's the first, but hopefully not the last announcement that we make in this space as well. So.
Excellent. I do have a question specific to EVs. So this is from Jenny Amy. What impact does the goal to replace oil-driven vehicles with electric vehicles have on the electrical power infrastructure that we currently use? So I'll throw it to either of you.
Yeah,
Jess, do you want to take that one?
Maybe. I was going to pass it to you, Chad. So yeah, maybe just to start. So the plugging in report, you can find that report on our website. And so it says a really good, kind of first brush at the existing inventory and recommendations for how we can move forward with that. And in regards to the infrastructure, because that's a really important conversation, an important question. So as we move this work forward with some planning and action planning and in conversation with municipalities and even some private sector partners that are looking at installing, it is a conversation to have with local utilities as well in regards to capacity and what that means locally and how we're able to manage that. But Chad, I know with your experience in that portfolio, with your sort of previous career experience, can you add to that?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think that, the transition to electric vehicles is really a fascinating conversation, and we'll put out a few milestones to kind of set the tone. So the government of Canada has announced that by 2035, you will no longer be able to purchase an internal combustion engine within Canada. So the reason being for that, if you count the timeline back, it's a very strategic decision. The typical internal combustion engine lasts for somewhere between 10 to 15 years for most folks. So if we're looking at a net zero 2050 target, that's about 15 years before we're looking at transitioning to a net zero future. So that kind of sets the tone on where we're going and why 2035. I think there's been some questions about where's that coming from, and really it's about, we have this net zero 2050 target, and if we're going to do that, there needs to be more internal combustion engines come off the road than being put on. So that's the target for the 2035 goal. And I think that's really kickstarted. I think some folks look at the calendar, and 2035 is not that far away. Like the vehicle that I own, I think I'm more than certain that my next vehicle will be an electric vehicle. And that's going to put a significant amount of demand, not only on the grid writ large, so our electricity grid, obviously drawing generation from different sources. And the interesting thing about grids is that they're also different from province to province, right? This is a provincially regulated jurisdiction, with the Government of Canada announcing some ambitions to really encourage grids to reach net zero. But when you look at Ontario, we've got a distributed network of generation, and we also have significant sources of generation coming offline. The Pickering nuclear plant operated by OPG, which is about 2,000 megawatts of electricity, is coming offline in the year 2025. So when we look at that, this increased demand for electrification combined with some sources of generation coming offline, it really makes the case for, it starts to raise some eyebrows on the types of generation we're going to need, and really making the case for those significant baseload power the assets on our grids. With respect to kind of specific demands on the grid, it'll also put a lot of pressure on local distribution companies like the Westarios and Hydro Ones of the world who really operate those closest to home, those last mile delivery mechanisms. Ensuring that your home might be retrofitted for an electric vehicle charging station, or different downtown regions might have electric vehicle charging infrastructure. It's going to be a pretty significant challenge to face, but I think that the interesting thing about electricity is that it's already everywhere. So there's going to be some significant benefits or some significant opportunities there to build out that infrastructure, but it's not without investment and without some challenges. That's for
sure. Okay, I think I have one for you, Jess, from Chris Herbert. Is it possible to expand on the importance of the local development of jobs and businesses, and whether that is a core focus of the Nuclear Innovation Institute and other leaders in Grey Bruce and Huron counties?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there's great opportunity right now in Grey Bruce, Huron. We know that, and we see that every day in all different sectors. And when I talk about the nuclear sector, the clean energy sector, and I'm including, so I am talking nuclear, but I am including these new technologies, these new clean energy initiatives like hydrogen, like what does it look like for SMRs in our area? What does it look like for fusion? Like these are, and like Chad said, this isn't a 20-year away thing. Like it's the next few years, we're seeing some significant change and opportunity, which also means workforce strategy. And I had a conversation on Friday with our regional steering committee, and Savannah Myers with Grey County joined the conversation, and I was so pleased that she did, because I do recognize Grey County is doing tremendous work on workforce strategy, as is Bruce County, as are individual organizations like Launchpad and Hanover. So workforce development and strategy is a really critical piece as well, to make sure that we're having these humans ready for this workforce and this shift. The other side, though, that I do want to touch on as part of my role, we have these nuclear suppliers who have landed, they've expanded into the region. They're in some cases relocating people, in some cases hiring local, and they're here to support the major component replacement if they're a nuclear supplier. And that major component replacement project will be done by 2035. And so that sustainability piece is key. How do we ensure that these employers are staying here, and how can they diversify and find other opportunities for work, so that when their work with Bruce Power specific and the major component replacement, as that wraps up, what else is available in Grey Bruce, Huron? And we know, we live here, we work here, we play here, we know that there's lots of opportunity. And so making some of those connections, back to that very first slide around being those connectors and those conveners. And so, Chris, thanks for your question. It's a really important conversation to continue and to make those connections and work collaboratively with groups like Catapults Grey Bruce, where I'm sitting today, having these relationships and these collaborative discussions. They're helping these conversations and these MOUs, these friendships, these partnerships, they're helping us learn, but they're helping us connect with some of the significant talent that's here. Maybe it's not in the nuclear industry now or yet. Maybe there's an opportunity. The Catapult Tech Network is a great opportunity to bring those tech-minded professionals, introduce them to some of the advanced tech, the robotics, the artificial intelligence that's happening in nuclear, and how can we help these companies diversify into tech. Maybe that's with healthcare, manufacturing. So all of that good stuff to say there's no shortage of opportunity, and I'm grateful for the collaborative conversations that we've had.
Great, thank you. We've got 10 minutes left before breaking for lunch. There was mention in the presentations of two specific things that I think potentially have applications for agriculture, and I'm wondering if you might expand on them. This might be a Chad question, could be a both of you question. There was mention of microgeneration, specifically projects in Alberta, but I know that there are microgeneration projects that happen in Ontario as well. And also SNRs, if we might get just a slightly more fulsome description of what SNRs are, where they are used, and whether or not there is an application in agriculture and food and how they might contribute, that would be great.
Yeah, I can jump in on that one. So I'll start with the second piece first. So with SMRs are a really fascinating topic in the energy space, in the nuclear space. Essentially what an SMR, and again, we use acronyms far too much, so I apologize. SMR means a small modular reactor, which essentially means that it is just that. It is a reactor that is smaller in scale and it basically operating at the 300 megawatt range, anywhere. I think it's typically 50 to 100 or 300 megawatts that they operate in. That doesn't mean a lot to most people, but essentially that powers about 300,000 homes, I would say 300 megawatts. So that to kind of put it in context, modular means that the reactor is built elsewhere and assembled on site. So you're not kind of doing these massive builds that you build every single component kind of on the go at a specific site. They're modular in nature, meaning a factory is building a factory, I guess is the best way to put it. The interesting conversation around SMRs, we'll learn a lot from the SMR that's currently being built at OPG Darlington. So presently there is an SMR being built in Ontario that will really give a lot of lessons for how this can be deployed elsewhere. I think the conversations around energy and how they connect to ag are really, really fascinating when you look at distributed energy resources. So there's another acronym, DERs, will start to become, I think, commonplace in the next five years or so. So distributed energy resources are kind of basically grids that are not connected to the central grid. So you have a generation asset, and then you have a network of users of that asset that are not connected to the big grid. And that's where potentially things like the greenhouse sector or the agricultural sector, if there's a network of intense users of electricity, might be interested in operating their own distributed energy resource. And that's really a fascinating conversation as we look at this net zero conversation. We look at what our energy future looks like and the demands that'll be on the grid from things like electric vehicles, et cetera. Potentially there's a conversation to be had about establishing distributed energy resources around the province, which will be really interesting. And that's where you get into things as well, like microgeneration, biogas, et cetera. How do those fit into these micro grids and more kind of community focused grid level players? So that's I think the conversation around SMRs. There's also, to confuse everybody further, there's also microreactors, which are much smaller and would be specific to basically powering like a small town plus one big user of electricity, instead of that kind of 300,000 home type output. So when we look at microreactors, there's also an opportunity for that down the road. It's just, how do we deploy these assets strategically? And I think, again, that get to know that acronym DER, distributed energy resources. It's a conversation that, at least at a policy level within government, that's going on right now about how do we make these resources work to our advantage and contribute to a net zero economy. Did I get everything there, Philly?
Yeah, that was a fantastic answer. And thank you for correcting me on the acronym. Yeah, that was fantastic. So I'll give just a few seconds if there are any further questions, and if not, we get early recess, which I know I always appreciate. This afternoon, I'm not seeing any other further questions coming up on my screen, so
if I may, instead in lieu of another question, if I may make a comment, just
yes, please.
Perfect. So I think it's really fascinating. I thank you so much for inviting us to present today. And it's really quite a fascinating conversation that's going on with respect to agriculture. For so long, agriculture was villainized in terms of the climate change conversation as this central emitter, and there was no opportunity, and everybody needs to change their diets fundamentally, and we need to move away from the role that agriculture, like industrial agriculture, might play, or really agriculture at large might play in a net zero economy. And I think that the conversation is shifting. There are certainly important conversations to be had around diets and sustainable food, et cetera, and really the way we deliver our food networks, et cetera. Those are certainly conversations worth having, but there really has been a palpable shift in villainizing agriculture to looking at agriculture as a strategic opportunity for net zero. And I really think that it's important to leave that group with that message, that even somebody who works in the energy sector is fascinated by what's going on in agriculture, because really that's kind of really the front lines on carbon sequestration, these really important topics around net zero. That happens on farm and at a farm level, at farms of all sizes as well too. So just wanted to leave the group with that we take a lot of inspiration by what agriculture is doing.
That is an absolutely perfect sentiment to leave with. Thank you. And I think all of our presenters have touched on that, if not in almost exactly the same words, then in very similar ways, looking at agriculture as a solution rather than a problem. And I really appreciate that, as you say, looking at it from the energy sector, you're still seeing those strides forward. So thanks to both of you. Thank you, Chad. Thank you, Jessica, for joining.